Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the MedTech Impact Podcast, where you get to hear from leaders and innovators who are shaping the future of medical technology. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meiklejohn.
And we're your hosts of the show.
So today on the MedTech Impact Podcast, we're delighted to be joined by Yashar Vahedein, CEO and co-founder of Coredio. Yashar, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well, we are delighted to have you on. You are top dog. You were the big winner at the recent March Ahead event brought to you by our friends at Benny Studio. So big shout out to Benny Studio and all they do in the software space for MedTech. But equally bringing this platform and this stage for you guys to share what you're doing, which we're obviously going to dive into today to talk about the problem you're being solved, the solution, and what's happening with Coredio. We always kick things off by thinking about what is that big problem that Coredio is looking to solve?
So basically, one of the biggest problems for healthcare is always like cardiovascular issues, right? And specifically, the problem that we are looking at is heart failure. Heart failure is a big problem both around the globe as well as in US. Currently, 65 million people around the globe suffer from heart failure. And in US, this number is 7 million. And interestingly, every year, another 1 million is added to this number. So new patients with heart failure. However, with all these big numbers, there's 40% of these patients that never receive a catheterization or echo as part of their care because the hospitals basically can't do that because of the number of patients that exist. And this is why some of these patients go home after the first admission, go home with still an exacerbated heart. And they go home with the current standard of care of just a blood pressure cuff and a scale, which is not at all enough to monitor their cardiac information. So for those that are a little bit more critical, they go home with an implantable. They put an implantable in their basically pulmonary arteries. One of these implantables are called like CardioMEMS. So they go home with a CardioMEMS device so they can monitor their condition. So as you can see, the current standard of care, just a blood pressure cuff and a scale, is causing these patients to come back to the hospital very regularly. So half of the 1 million patients that are new patients per year, they come back to the hospital under 6 months with much worse conditions. And 23% come back under 1 month. And this causes a lot of basically pain to both the patients as well as the hospital and also insurance companies.
And so it doesn't come any bigger, as you mentioned, talking about cardiovascular and the numbers you mentioned and the growing problem as we have an aging population and we see more people, facing these issues. Can you tell us a little bit more about the financial aspect? I think we all know that it costs hospitals a lot of money anytime people come to the hospital and receive care there. How are you seeing that in terms of the impact through the effects, whether that's the lack of screening or the lack of sort of touch points in terms of the follow-up care?
Yeah, the financial side of things is actually, it's huge. For heart failure, it's a $40 billion basically cost for US only in terms of all the cost of care for heart failure patients. And when we look at specifically cost of readmissions for the hospitals in US, we are seeing a $4.6 billion cost only from the hospitals because of that 1 month readmission. When the patient comes back too early to the hospital, based on if the hospital is a fee-for-service hospital or a value-based care-based hospital, they either pay out of pocket from the bundles that they have for care of that patient, or they get penalty if the patient comes back too early. So that's one of the key issues. Another key issue that they're facing is that they can't keep the patient in the hospital when they are admitted for more than 5 days. Any more days will cost them a lot of money. So they want to discharge the patient as soon as possible. But when the patient is not fully stable, that's not an option. So that's another piece that they're losing a lot of money that they could have basically treated another patient for that same amount of time. So these are some of the big issues in terms of providers, but for payers as well, they are facing this issue of admissions, readmissions. They need to pay for all the costs of that. And there are just so many of them, 1.2 million people per year. So that's really a big issue for them, which causes 11 billion plus costs for them.
Wow, so big numbers.
Yeah, and what was really interesting to me, Yashar, is I'm fascinated. What's the problem with the cuffs, the wearable there? Why doesn't that work as well as we want it to?
So that's a very good question. So the reason that catheterization and echo are kind of gold standard of care is because they can look into the heart, basically. They can look inside the heart and see how the heart is doing. They can look at things like filling pressure. They can look at things like cardiac output, systemic vascular resistance, and central venous pressure, which are key components that doctors need to understand what's the situation with the patient that has heart failure. But the cuff blood pressure and scale can only show if the patient gained weight because they have heart failure. And that usually happens after the patient is already in a much worse condition and they already have fluid buildup because of the basically decompensated heart, because of the elevated heart failure. So that's already a little bit late when those signs start to appear. But if you had access to something like a catheter at home of the patient, then you could see all those cardiac metrics and prevent that from happening by titrating the medication of the patient in time and basically keeping them stable.
Which kind of goes back, Richard, to your point, when you're asking about cost. I mean, obviously, I would imagine either a catheterization or even an implantable device. I mean, that's a surgery, that's a serious procedure. There's a lot of costs associated with that. So I'm hearing one extreme versus the other. It's either you've got the cuff or you're having a minimally invasive or even potentially invasive procedure being performed. And there's really nothing that's, in the middle there to solve this problem that can provide the accurate diagnostics that you're looking to achieve and provide your patients with.
That's exactly right. So as you just mentioned, there is this CardioMEMS device, for example, and that costs $23,000 per patient to implant that. And then usually doctors hesitate to do that unless the patient already had 2 or 3 readmissions, because it can be a little bit risky too. Sometimes patient might not be able to basically go through that procedure without any problem. So they don't want to always do that as a first option. And only 12,000 of them are done per year right now. So these are not enough for treating the 1.2 million new patients, right? So that's one of the issues that we're seeing with these implantables. Mm-hmm. However, they are showing that they can measure some of these key cardiac metrics and reduce the readmissions for those that receive them. So it would have been nice if we could get the same data without that implantable.
And we've touched on the providers, we've touched on the payers, like in terms of the patients, which we're now discussing, like what's that feedback been like in terms of the pain point for the patients? Because, clearly when we're thinking about the technology and the impact it can have, this is why, the innovation exists to help these patients to have a better standard of care. So, what are the sort of frustrations and the pain points the patients are seeing through the current process?
Yeah, for patients, I think they are definitely the most important piece here, because they are suffering the most from the heart failure. I mean, for them, heart failure feels like, as they describe to us, it feels like drowning alive. So when you have heart failure, you feel like, you're drowning because you have this fluid buildup in your lungs. So after they get discharged, they're hoping that they can stay stable, but then the same thing happens again to them. So they would really want to do anything that their clinician will tell them to keep them stable. So they are willing to basically do all the standard of care, like use the cuff blood pressure. They do take their weight on the weight scale, and then they report it back to their care team every day so that they can stay stable. But again, because of these issues that I've described, they come back to the hospital because they never received the correct dosage of the medication. So for them, it's very important because actually more than like 20% of these patients might actually unfortunately die in the process while they go home. And then another 40% come back with much worse conditions, go back to ICU, and only about 40% plus, like 40% or so, remain stable with the medication titration regimen.
So Kyle, these are the sort of scary outcomes for sound like they're crying out for a solution, and I'm sure the audience are primed and wanting to know now how Cordio is solving some of these problems.
Well, you know, it's funny because we took our time getting into the solution here, and I think that's important, right? Because this is such a massive problem, and I think it just goes to show you how serious this is. So, yeah, I think we're all on the edge of our seats now. How's Cordio looking to solve this big problem?
Yeah, I mean, this is extremely important for us. And we looked at all these solutions that currently exist, like implantables. And we were imagining, like, can you do the same thing that the implantable is doing? Or can you do a similar thing that a catheter or an echo is doing, only with using the currently available technologies? So that was kind of the premise of how we came up with Cordio. And now we're building the first ever software platform that can use the wearable devices that already exist, such as your Apple Watch, your Samsung Watch, or Fitbit, and then plus a blood pressure cuff, which heart failure patients already take home with them.
Mm-hmm.
We can use these two devices, and using our AI and physics-based technology that we have patented, we are able to extract the same cardiac information that a catheter or an implantable can extract. And that opens a huge opportunity here, because guideline-directed medication therapy, as I was mentioning, is important to manage the medication, titrate the medication of the patient after they leave the hospital. And we can make that possible without introducing any new device to the hospitals or to the patient. They can just use their own wearables and only our software on top of it.
Yeah, and I would actually, that I'm really curious. Can you walk us through exactly kind of how this technology works then?
Yeah. So we basically, the first time that the patient comes to the hospital and they get diagnosed with heart failure, they usually go through regular checkups, like they take their ECGs, they take their pulse ox, they take their blood pressure, they might do ultrasounds on them to see how their cardiac situation is, how their heart is looking. So we take all those data, and we have a digital twin technology, which is basically, as the name suggests, it replicates how their heart and their arteries of the patient work. So we create a replica of that. We connect what's happening at the heart to what's happening all the way to here. When we measure some things at the wrist, now we can track back what happened at the heart. So there is some level of like very sophisticated physics, math, and AI that happens until we can capture 4 key metrics that 60 plus cardiologists told us so far that they really love to see these metrics, and that's how they titrate the medication of the patient. And those metrics are specifically filling pressure of the left ventricle, which is called left ventricle and diastolic pressure, the cardiac output, which is how much blood the basically heart is pumping at each cycle, systemic vascular resistance, which is the resistance of the arteries, the whole systemic arteries, as well as central venous pressure, or the pressure of the when the blood is returning to the heart. So these 4 metrics are key, and we're measuring all 4.
And are you doing it? Is it through like a Bluetooth technology? How is it connected? Is this a software that goes in a hospital system? Is it an app on the patient's phone? What does that look like?
So yeah, it has a patient-facing side and the clinician-facing side. So in terms of clinicians, we have a web app, and then they can sign in. It is currently being developed, but it will have interoperability with their EHR, EMR systems. So everything is kind of easy for them to access.
Okay.
They will be able to see all the name of the patients, how they're doing, and then they can click on each patient and see notification. And for example, it will show the left ventricle and diastolic pressure of this patient went up. So they can go into that patient's profile, see what happened to the patient, how's the medication is affecting them, are they getting better or not. They can message the patient, call the patient, and change the medication if needed. On the patient side, the app goes on their phone and as well as their watch. And the only thing that the patient needs to do is putting their finger on the ECG sensor of the watch, and then we take care of the rest. We basically measure things at the wrist, we measure things at the cuff. So it needs to be a compatible cuff, so we can automatically do all this.
Sure.
So we take all that data, send it to our servers, do the analysis, and send it both to the patient and the doctor. However, patient will only see their vitals and see their numbers. They don't receive like alerts. They will be able to, however, like mention that or send the reports to the doctors if they're concerned about something. But the doctors will see all the alerts and the things that they need to be looking for.
Awesome. That makes a ton of sense. And it's great because it's non-invasive, Richard. That's what I love about this. It's non-invasive. And I mean, it sounds like this is providing that standard of care that you would get from those implantables, from those more invasive types of procedures in a non-invasive way, providing better, more accurate results, faster, quicker diagnostics and detection, right, of any maybe larger problems that could occur in the near future.
Yeah, absolutely, Cal. And I think, that when you think about AI, clearly data is the key component about how you build that model and how you then leverage it. So I'm kind of curious now to think about, so you're collecting all this new information and you're having all this insight, what's the sort of the short-term value add in terms of that decision making for the clinician, but equally, I presume going forward, there could be some behavioral aspects for the patient where you could start to shift some of those behaviors, which hopefully leads to better outcomes going forward.
Yeah, that's a very good point. For example, one of the key issues with the heart failure care is the adherence to the guidelines. So a lot of the patients have trouble on understanding exactly like what needs to be done, how to take the dosage of the medication, also like how to take the measurements correctly. And sometimes they forget to take measurements, and sometimes there's no good follow-up with the patient. So a lot of things get lost in the procedure. But having something that's already on your wrists and just a blood pressure cuff added to that will make things much easier, and are automatically communicating basically technology that sends the data from the watch to the hospital, and everything is seamless. So that makes it much easier to basically improve this adherence for the patients as well.
So a lot of promise going forward and for the here and now. And I think you guys are surfing a few pretty big waves in terms of like, this technology, which we're seeing growing more and more about the available solutions which can help patients at home. And then that obviously is tied into the more hospital at home programs where something like this ties in so nicely. So I'm sure the audience are kind of keen to know more about where are you on this journey. You obviously have this demo product available. You've just come off the back again of winning this pitch challenge with Benny Studio. What's the latest with you guys in terms of the MVP development and going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. We're really excited right now because we collected a lot of good proprietary data from three large hospitals in US. We already have IRB approved studies with these three hospitals, and that allowed us to measure some of the basically invasive as well as non-invasive signals at the same time, so that we can compare our technology against invasive catheterization and see how well it works. And so far, we've basically took data from 60 patients, and the results have been fantastic. So we're really glad about that. We're seeing that things are looking pretty good. Our AI models are working pretty well, as well as the physics-based model is improving the AI model, because we can make our AI patient specific rather than just using for a general population. So this has been a great basic progress, especially in the last 3-4 months with the new data that's coming in. And we're not stopping there. We're collecting more data. And the reason that we're collecting this data is that we looked at many different available data sets out there, like from Mayo Clinic, from other locations, and we couldn't find exactly what we were looking for in any of those data sets. So we rolled up our sleeves and said, okay, we're going to do it ourselves. It took a while until we created the relationships. We were able to do all these tests in the hospitals, got the approvals and all that, but it's really worth it because now we have some data that haven't been done before, and we were able to train our AI models. We are now able to show the accuracy of this technology, and we're not stopping there. We are collecting more data so that we can go for our FDA clearance pathway.
And like that FDA clearance pathway, what does that look like for you guys? You know, like, are you hoping to have that achieved by the end or the beginning of next year? What's the sort of the timeline for that?
Yeah, so we are hoping to basically collect enough data so that we can show that for our pre-pivotal studies, we already done enough. So hoping that this year we do our pre-sub meeting with FDA and potentially even get a breakthrough designation. So that's also on our plan. We already started some communications with FDA regarding that, and things are going well there, but we'll see how that develops until the end of the year. We have a really good FDA advisory team that are helping us build our intended use, indication for use documents, and we are being really proactive about that, hoping that by end of this year we do our pre, and by end of next year hopefully get our FDA clearance after doing a pivotal study. Basically, we're looking at some of the predicates that are device-based technologies that are trying to do some similar stuff, but they build their own devices that they need to attach on the chest or attach on different parts of the body of the patient and need like a specific technician or a calibration in the hospital. But with our technology, it's like device agnostic, don't need a certain device, and hoping that we can get a breakthrough designation for that.
And Yashar, who is your ideal customer, would you say? Is it like the healthcare system? Are we talking cardiology groups, primary care networks?
Our first target customer are the providers, basically the hospital systems as well as the cardiology groups, because they see the most costs for the heart failure patients that are leaving the hospital, or the cost of length of stay of these patients. So another piece to that is that reimbursement for patient monitoring, remote patient monitoring, is becoming a big thing, and insurance companies are really supporting that initiative. Since last year, like 23 to 24, the number of reimbursement codes for RPM doubled, actually, the number of used codes, which shows that even the payers seeing the value for that remote patient monitoring and how it is going to evolve the care as we know it. So that's why for the providers themselves, these three things matter a lot: reimbursement for remote patient monitoring, length of stay reduction, as well as readmission reduction. And we are trying to basically say with our technology, you can have all three just by paying for a subscription for our technology. And then in addition to that, the benefit, as you see, will be for insurance companies, as well as some pharma companies that are making those medication for heart failure patients.
Yeah, you've got it all planned out and you're laser focused on that ideal customer, which is really important. It sounds like there's a very exciting 12 to 18 months ahead for you guys. You know, you were alluding to some really important studies and doing your FDA submission. I guess tell us a little bit more kind of about that process, especially like where do you stand right now with the technology? Like what do you really have to do to put the finishing touches on it, you know, as you go into these studies and then look for your FDA submission and maybe even getting the breakthrough designation?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've already built basically the technology itself, like how it works, it's there. So it's the AI component, the physics component, that is there, which is the main secret sauce, the whole thing that we put more than 5 years, 6 years on it to build. So that part is done. Now the looks like is going to be done. So like how it's going to look at the hospital. We already have the wireframes of that, but we're going to execute that so that all the interoperability, all the like nice wireframes that we already built are functional. Doctors can actually interact with that. So those pieces are now being built. So and that's the easier part, I would say. Not the difficult part is mostly done. On the difficult part, we also need to do a little bit more automation, which we are basically focusing on that as well. But then hopefully when these come together, we will have a full MVP that would be our version 1. That's the focus hopefully for this year.
Amazing. And I'm excited for what you've got going forward because I feel like you've already done an incredible job getting to where you are. And you mentioned some of the, you've got these 3 big hospital groups you're already working with. I also feel like there's a huge opportunity in the future with some channel partners. So, the people who are providing technologies that complement what you're doing. So how are you thinking about that in terms of like, are there people that you're already working with, or are there people who are maybe listening today that you'd be a shout out and say you'd like to work with in future?
Definitely. The wearable companies, like wearable device makers, they are some of the companies that would be really nice partner for us. And we already started talking with a few of them. And another piece is that companies that do portable ultrasound, or companies that are doing sensor-based, basically building sensor-based wearables for specific needs. Like let's say they're building that for neuromodulation, or they're building that for a specific diagnosis. We would be able to partner with those companies. Another aspect to that is there are already companies that are doing remote patient monitoring for heart failure patient as a service. So there are some companies out there that they provide nurses, they provide the basically calls to the patient after the discharge of the patient, so that they can make sure the patient is adhering to their process of care. And then they even sometimes send the clinician to the home of the patient to ensure everything is going well. So those type of companies can be also very a good partner for us. And last but not least, the companies that are already building marketplaces for cardiac softwares. They already have a good presence in the hospitals. They have a good presence in the basically some of them already have good presence in terms of consumer market as well. So we would love to work with them to get more access to a larger market faster. However, for our strategy, we're looking first at the top hospitals that have the highest number of readmissions and highest number of usage of heart failure, basically treatment codes. So those are our first targets, which will directly go to those hospitals to and show them that, yeah, this works, see the results, let's work together.
I love this. I'm sure like the listeners, it's so exciting when you think about the collaboration, the potential opportunities to work together. And to me and Kyle, I'm sure we think the same way. It's like this is the future of medical technology. It's all about collaboration. We have so much great technology out there. It's all about the integration. And then again, how do we work together to get these solutions to the patient in the fastest, most efficient way possible? So excited for you guys going forward.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's very exciting time, and we see a great potential. I mean, heart failure is just part of this that can be serviced. Like some technology like this can help with a lot of different cardiac conditions, as well as even some non-cardiac specifically focused conditions. But for us, cardiac is the first thing, and heart failure is the first market that we're going for. But things such as coronary artery disease, such as patients that might have aneurysms, or patients that might have gone through a TAVR or transaortic valve replacement, they might be able to even benefit from such a technology in future. So while everyone have a wearable device and AI is being basically a front runner in terms of technology, and every day we're seeing something new from AI, I think it was just a matter of time that now we should see something like this in medical technology as well. Hopefully, medical technology can also go as fast as the generative AI movement, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And Yashar, before we let you go, where can everyone find you? Where can they learn more? How do they get in touch? Let the people know.
Absolutely, yes. So they can visit our website, cordio-ai.com. You can go there, read a little bit about our technology. Not all the information there. We need to still keep some of that information until they can become public, but they can read about our technology and they can subscribe to receive our emails. And please feel free to put a note and tell us about like what you're interested in, and we can kind of get back to you in case that you're interested.
Awesome. And will you be attending any shows or conferences coming up?
We are thinking of attending a few of the coming up conferences. We were just part of the MedTech Innovator pitch at the Los Angeles pitch. Basically, we went through that. It was a fantastic experience. And then we might be attending the upcoming conference, but that's going to be decided in the next week. Yeah.
Great. Very exciting.
Amazing. Well, Yashar, I can't thank you enough for all you're doing. Obviously, wishing you well with that MedTech Innovator next round of progression. I think you guys have such an exciting platform, and to us, I think the way you're approaching it through this collaborative system is so important. So, wishing you well with the journey.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk about this. This is fantastic, and thanks for having me here.
Yeah, tremendous work, Yashar. Well, ladies and gentlemen, another huge thank you to our guest, Yashar Vahedein, co-founder and CEO of Coredio. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of the MedTech Impact Podcast. I'm Kyle Cruz.
And I'm Richard Meikle. Until next time, keep innovating.